You've heard the stories, you've seen the standoffs, but what if the Wild West you think you know never existed at all? The six-shooter every cowboy carried? Mostly a myth. The deadly duels at high noon, rare to the point of fantasy. Even the towns we think were lawless were surprisingly well regulated. So, how did we get it so wrong? And who made sure we never knew the truth? In this video, we're digging deep into 11 of Hollywood's biggest lies about the Wild West and uncovering the surprising, raw, and often forgotten truths underneath. From the myths that defined generations to the facts buried beneath the frontier's dust, this is the West, Unfiltered. Number 11. Gunfighters always wore black hats and white hats. Let's start with one of Hollywood's most persistent myths. The idea that you could tell the good guys from the bad guys just by looking at their hat color. In every Western movie, the villain struts around in a black hat, while the hero sports a pristine white one. It's become so iconic that we still use the phrase black hat and white hat to describe villains and heroes today. But here's the catch. This color-coded morality system never existed in the real Wild West. Cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws wore whatever hats they could afford or find. Most frontier hats were brown, tan, or gray because these colors hid dirt better and lasted longer in harsh conditions. A white hat on the dusty frontier would be brown within hours and completely impractical for someone who spent their days riding through desert terrain. The black hat versus white hat trope was actually created by early Hollywood filmmakers who needed a simple way to help audiences distinguish between characters in black and white films. The contrast made it easier to see who was who on screen, especially during action sequences. Real Wild West figures like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday wore whatever was practical, regardless of color. The truth is even more interesting. Many famous lawmen and outlaws looked remarkably similar and often came from the same backgrounds. Some even switched sides depending on circumstances, making the clear moral divisions of Hollywood completely unrealistic. Bat Masterson, for example, worked as both a lawman and a gambler throughout his career, wearing the same practical brown hat in both roles. In reality, you were more likely to identify someone's profession by their boots, spurs, or the wear patterns on their clothes than by their hat color. But Hollywood needed simple visual cues, so they created this myth that we still believe today. Wait until you hear about our next myth. It involves one of the most famous weapons in Wild West history, and the truth will absolutely shock you. Number 10. The Colt 45 was the most popular Wild West weapon. Everyone knows the Colt 45. It's the iconic weapon of every Western hero from John Wayne to Clint Eastwood. Hollywood has made us believe that every self-respecting gunslinger carried one of these legendary revolvers. The problem? The famous Colt 45 barely existed during the actual Wild West era, and when it did appear, most people couldn't afford it. What Hollywood calls the Colt 45 was actually the Colt Single Action Army revolver, and it wasn't introduced until 1773. By that time, much of the Wild West's most legendary period was already over. The California Gold Rush, the height of the cattle drives, and many famous conflicts had already happened using completely different weapons. The real truth is devastating. Most frontiersmen carried whatever they could afford, and that was rarely a brand new Colt revolver. These weapons were expensive, costing about $17 in 1873, which equals roughly $400 today. For perspective, a cowboy's monthly wages were typically around $30, making a new Colt revolver more than half a month's salary for most working men. Instead, the most popular weapons were actually converted percussion revolvers, older single-shot pistols, and surprisingly, shotguns. The shotgun was far more practical for frontier life, better for hunting, more effective at close range, cheaper to maintain, and required less skill to use effectively. Many famous lawmen, including Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp, preferred shotguns for serious confrontations because they were simply more reliable. Here's a fact that Hollywood never mentions. The Colt Single-Action Army was actually designed primarily for military use, not civilian gunfighters. The U.S. Army ordered them to replace older military revolvers, but civilian adoption was much slower than movies suggest. Most civilians who owned revolvers carried older, cheaper models or foreign-made weapons that cost half as much as a new Colt. The iconic spinning of revolvers around fingers that you see in every Western? Completely impossible with a loaded weapon, and incredibly dangerous even with an unloaded one. Real gunfighters treated their weapons as tools, not toys. But here's where it gets really interesting. The next lie involves something you've seen in literally every Western movie, and everything about it is completely wrong. Number 9. Gunfighters drew from hip holsters in quick-draw duels. Picture the classic Western scene. Two gunfighters face each other at high noon, hands hovering over their hip-mounted revolvers, ready to draw faster than the eye can see. This image is burned into our collective consciousness, appearing in countless films and TV shows. But it's almost entirely fiction, and the reality is far more brutal and practical. Most Wild West gunfighters didn't carry their weapons in hip holsters at all. The most common way to carry a handgun was tucked into a belt, waistband, or coat pocket. Purpose-made gun holsters were actually quite rare and expensive, often costing as much as the gun itself. When holsters were used, they were typically designed for protection and retention during horseback riding, not for quick drawing. Real gunfights in the Wild West were brutal, chaotic affairs that bore no resemblance to Hollywood's choreographed duels. Most shootings happened suddenly, often with one person getting the drop on another through surprise or superior positioning. The idea of two men facing each other in the street and drawing simultaneously was virtually non-existent in historical records. Wild Bill Hickok, one of the most famous gunfighters, typically carried his revolver's butt forward in a sash around his waist, the opposite of what movies show. Wyatt Earp often kept his gun in his coat pocket or tucked into his waistband. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral involved men pulling weapons from various locations, pockets, coats, and improvised carrying methods, not synchronized hip draws. But here's the most shocking part. The whole concept of the quick draw was largely invented by 20th century exhibition shooters and Hollywood stunt performers. Real frontier gunfighters were far more concerned with accuracy, surprise, and tactical advantage than speed. As one famous saying of the time went, "Speed's fine, but accuracy is final." The fastest draw in the world means nothing if you can't hit your target, and real gunfighters knew this intimately. They practiced marksmanship and tactical thinking, not theatrical drawing techniques. Most successful gunfighters survived because they chose their battles carefully and fought smart, not because they could draw quickly. But that's nothing compared to our next Hollywood lie. This one involves the most famous gunfight in Wild West history, and everything you think you know about it is completely wrong. Can you believe how different the real Wild West was from what Hollywood shows us? If you're as fascinated by these hidden truths as we are, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, Consider subscribing for more deep dives into the legends and lies of America's most fascinating historical periods. We're just getting started with these shocking revelations, and trust me, the next myth we're about to expose will completely change how you think about cowboy life. Number 8. The gunfight at the OK Corral was a classic Western duel. Hollywood has turned the gunfight at the OK Corral into the ultimate Western showdown, a clean, honorable duel between good and evil that lasted several minutes with dramatic dialogue, heroic poses, and clear moral lines. Movies show it as the perfect example of frontier justice, where righteous lawmen faced down dangerous outlaws in a fair fight. The reality was far different and much more morally complex. First, the famous gunfight didn't even happen at the OK Corral. It took place in a narrow vacant lot near Fremont Street in Tombstone, Arizona, about 6 doors down from the actual corral. The fight lasted approximately 30 seconds, not the extended battles shown in movies, and it was over before most participants could fully understand what was happening. But here's where it gets really complicated. This wasn't a fair fight between equals. The Earp brothers and Doc Holliday were armed and ready for trouble, while some of their opponents were either unarmed or caught by surprise. Ike Clanton, one of the supposed gunfighters, wasn't even armed and ran away at the first shot. Tom McClory was shot while trying to get a weapon from his horse, essentially making him a victim rather than a combatant. The whole confrontation was the result of a complex political and economic dispute involving cattle rustling accusations, stagecoach robberies, mining claims, and competing business interests. It wasn't a simple good versus evil scenario, but rather a messy conflict between rival factions in a boom town where the line between law enforcement and vigilantism was often blurred by personal and financial interests. Wyatt Earp was actually criticized by many Tombstone residents after the shootout. Some newspapers called it murder, and the Earps and Holliday were arrested and had to face a preliminary hearing that lasted a month. The idea that they were universally seen as heroes is pure Hollywood invention. Many locals viewed them as trigger-happy troublemakers. The real story involves accusations of stagecoach robbery, disputed mining claims, political corruption, and personal vendettas stretching back months. Both sides had legitimate grievances and questionable motives, making it impossible to draw the clear moral lines that Hollywood loves. Wait until you discover our next myth. It's about something every Western movie gets completely wrong, and it involves the most basic aspect of Wild West life that will change everything you thought you knew. Number 7. Cowboys spent most of their time in gunfights and saloon brawls. Hollywood cowboys seem to spend all their time getting into shootouts, starting bar fights, and facing down outlaws in dusty streets. Every Western shows cowboys as gunfighting wanderers who drift from town to town looking for trouble. But the reality of cowboy life was completely different and far less glamorous than movies suggest. It was actually much harder and more dangerous, just not in the way you'd expect. Real cowboys were essentially migrant ranch workers who spent most of their time doing backbreaking agricultural labor. They herded cattle across vast distances, mended fences in brutal weather, branded livestock with hot irons, and performed countless other mundane tasks essential to ranch operations. The average cowboy saw maybe 1 or 2 towns during an entire cattle drive season, and most of their time was spent alone on the range or in the company of other ranch hands, not in saloons. Here's the devastating truth. Most cowboys never fired a gun in anger during their entire careers. Their weapons were tools for dealing with dangerous animals, putting injured livestock out of misery, and occasionally for hunting food. The idea of constant gunfights and duels was pure fiction created by dime novels and later Hollywood films. A typical cowboy earned between $25 and $40 per month, which was actually decent pay for unskilled labor at the time, but the work was incredibly dangerous. Just not from gunfights. Cowboys died from horse accidents, cattle stampedes, lightning strikes, flash floods, extreme weather exposure, and disease. More cowboys died from pneumonia, broken bones, and infected wounds than from bullets. The famous cattle drives that Hollywood loves to romanticize were actually relatively brief periods in Western history, lasting roughly from 1879 to 1886. The arrival of railroads and barbed wire quickly ended the era of long-distance cattle driving, making most cowboy movies historically obsolete before they even begin. But here's what's really interesting. Many real cowboys were African American, Mexican, or Native American, groups rarely represented accurately in Hollywood westerns. It's estimated that about 25% of cowboys were African American. Many of them former slaves who found better opportunities and more equality on the frontier than in the post-Civil War South. The romantic image of cowboys as free-spirited wanderers is also false. Most worked for large ranching operations and had bosses, schedules, and responsibilities, just like any other job. The next lie we're exposing involves one of the most iconic images of the Wild West, and the truth is far more surprising and complex than any Hollywood fiction. Number 6. Native Americans constantly attacked wagon trains. Every Hollywood Western seems to feature the same terrifying scene. A circle of covered wagons under attack by whooping Native American warriors, with brave pioneers fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. This image is so common in movies and television that most people believe wagon train attacks were a daily occurrence on the frontier, with every family facing mortal danger from hostile tribes. The truth is radically different and far more complex. Attacks on wagon trains by Native Americans were extremely rare events, not the constant warfare Hollywood depicts. Historical records show that out of the estimated 350,000 people who traveled the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails between 1840 and 1860s, fewer than 400 died in conflicts with Native Americans. It's about 0.1% of all travelers. But here's what's really shocking. Pioneers were far more likely to die from disease, accidents, or drowning than from Native American attacks. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever killed thousands of travelers, more than 10 times the number who died in conflicts. Accidental gunshot wounds, drowning at river crossings, being crushed by wagon wheels, and snake bites were much more common causes of death than arrows or bullets. Most interactions between wagon trains and Native American tribes were actually peaceful trade encounters that benefited both sides. Native Americans often served as guides, sold food and supplies to travelers, helped with difficult river crossings, and provided valuable information about weather and trail conditions. Many tribes had established profitable trading relationships with the steady stream of westward migrants. The reality was far more complex than Hollywood's black and white portrayal. While conflicts certainly occurred, they were usually the result of misunderstandings, competition for resources, treaty violations by either side, or retaliation for previous incidents. The image of unprovoked savage attacks on innocent families was largely a creation of sensationalist newspaper accounts designed to sell papers and later Hollywood films seeking dramatic conflict. The circular wagon fort formation that's iconic in Western movies was rarely used and wasn't particularly effective against determined attackers. Most wagon trains traveled in long lines for efficiency, and when camping, arranged their wagons in rectangles or ovals for convenience and social interaction, not defense. Many Native American tribes actually warned travelers about dangerous areas, hostile bands, or severe weather conditions, potentially saving thousands of lives that Hollywood never acknowledges. Our next Hollywood lie involves something you see in every saloon scene, and the reality is so different, it will completely change how you picture the Wild West. Number 5. Saloons were filled with piano music and elaborate entertainment. Walk into any Hollywood saloon, and you'll hear a piano player tinkling the ivories, see elaborate stage shows with dancing girls, and witness fancy gambling games with well-dressed participants smoking expensive cigars. The saloons of Hollywood are glamorous entertainment venues with polished bars, crystal chandeliers, an atmosphere that wouldn't look out of place in Las Vegas or New Orleans. Real Wild West saloons were nothing like this romanticized version, and the differences are shocking. Most frontier saloons were crude, simple establishments that served cheap alcohol in basic surroundings. The typical saloon was a single room with a bar made from wooden planks set on barrels, a few rough tables, some chairs if you were lucky, and maybe a spittoon. Entertainment was usually limited to conversation, simple card games, and occasional fights. Pianos were incredibly rare in frontier saloons because they were expensive, extremely difficult to transport across rough terrain, and required skilled maintenance in harsh conditions with extreme temperature changes. A piano cost more than most saloons made in several months. Most saloons that had any music at all featured simple instruments like harmonicas, fiddles, or banjos played by customers, not professional entertainers. The famous swinging batwing doors that every Hollywood saloon features were also uncommon. Most saloons had regular doors, and many didn't even have proper doors at all, just canvas flaps, blankets, or simple wooden barriers. Batwing doors were actually impractical because they didn't keep out dust, wind, or cold weather. Here's the reality that Hollywood won't show you. Most saloons were dirty, smelly places that served rot gut whiskey that could literally blind you if it wasn't properly distilled. The whiskey was often diluted with water, colored with tobacco juice or burnt sugar, and flavored with anything from turpentine to strychnine. Many patrons suffered from alcohol poisoning, and some died from drinking contaminated liquor that would be considered industrial solvent today. The elaborate gambling scenes in Hollywood saloons are also largely fictional. While gambling certainly occurred, most frontier towns had strict laws against professional gambling houses. Card games were usually simple affairs between locals playing for small stakes, not the high-stakes productions with professional dealers that movies portray. The beautiful saloon girls of Hollywood were rare in real frontier establishments, which were generally male-dominated spaces that most respectable women avoided entirely. But here's something that will really surprise you. The next lie involves the most basic aspect of Wild West gunfights, and everything you think you know about marksmanship is completely wrong. Number 4. Gunfighters could shoot with incredible accuracy while moving. Hollywood gunfighters are amazing marksmen who can hit targets with pinpoint accuracy while running, diving, shooting from horseback, or rolling behind cover. They consistently make impossible shots that would challenge even modern Olympic marksmen. Using advanced equipment, every Western hero can somehow hit a moving target while moving themselves, often at incredible distances with perfect precision. The reality? Shooting accurately with 19th century firearms required tremendous skill even under perfect conditions. And moving targets or shooting while in motion made accuracy nearly impossible. The technology simply wasn't advanced enough for the feats shown in movies. The black powder revolvers and rifles of the Wild West era were far less accurate than modern weapons. These guns suffered from inconsistent powder charges that varied with humidity, poor quality bullets that weren't perfectly round, basic sighting systems that were often misaligned, and barrels that weren't precisely manufactured. Even skilled marksmen struggled to hit targets reliably at distances over 25 yards under ideal conditions. Here's the devastating truth. Most gunfights took place at extremely close range, often less than 10 feet apart, precisely because accuracy was so difficult. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral happened in a space only 15 feet wide, and even then, approximately 30 shots were fired, with only 3 men killed, meaning most shots missed their intended targets, and even at point-blank range. Wild Bill Hickok, considered one of the greatest gunfighters of his era, was famous for his marksmanship, but his legendary shots were made under carefully controlled conditions, not during chaotic gunfights. His most famous recorded shot, hitting a man at 75 yards, was made while standing still, taking careful aim and using a rifle with a long barrel, not a handgun during combat. Real frontier marksmen knew that accuracy required patience, proper stance, steady breathing, and careful aim. The idea of shooting multiple targets while diving through saloon windows or firing from galloping horses was pure fantasy. Even hitting a single target under those conditions would have been nearly miraculous with the weapons available. But here's what's really interesting. Many real gunfighters preferred shotguns precisely because accuracy was so difficult with handguns. A shotgun's spread pattern made hitting targets much more likely in close quarters confrontations, which is why lawmen like Wyatt Earp carried them. The famous trick shots performed by exhibition shooters like Annie Oakley were done under controlled conditions with specially prepared ammunition and modified weapons, not during actual combat situations. Wait until you hear the next lie. It involves one of the most iconic sounds of the Wild West that you've heard in every movie, but it's completely impossible with real weapons. This is incredible, isn't it? Who knew that Hollywood got so many basic facts completely wrong? If you have any thoughts or questions about these historical revelations, drop them in the comments below. We love hearing your insights and might even feature your comment in our next video. Number 3, revolvers made that distinctive clicking sound when cocked. Every time a Hollywood cowboy draws his gun, you hear that distinctive metallic clicking sound as he cocks the hammer. It's become so associated with westerns that the sound alone can transport you to dusty streets and showdowns at high noon. The dramatic click-click as someone slowly cocks their revolver is used to build tension in countless movies and TV shows. But here's the problem. Real Wild West revolvers didn't make that dramatic clicking sound when cocked. And more importantly, most gunfighters didn't walk around cocking their weapons for dramatic effect or intimidation. The metallic clicking sound in movies is artificially created by sound engineers using completely different materials and has nothing to do with how actual firearms operate. Real revolvers make minimal noise when cocked. Maybe a soft mechanical sound as the parts move, but nothing like the dramatic, echoing clicks in Hollywood films. More significantly, cocking a revolver was something you did when you were ready to shoot immediately, not for intimidation or dramatic effect. Walking around with a cocked revolver was extremely dangerous because these weapons had no safety mechanisms A cocked gun could fire from a simple jarring motion, dropping it, or even a hard jolt while riding a horse. Here's what real gunfighters knew. Carrying a loaded revolver with an empty chamber under the hammer was the safest practice. This meant that a 6-shot revolver was typically loaded with only 5 bullets, with the hammer resting on an empty chamber to prevent accidental discharge. To fire, you had to manually cock the hammer, which rotated the cylinder to bring a loaded chamber into position. The famous fanning technique, rapidly striking the hammer with the palm to fire multiple shots quickly, was another Hollywood invention that real gunfighters avoided. This technique was wildly inaccurate because it prevented proper aiming, and it would damage the gun's delicate timing mechanism. Real gunfighters valued accuracy and gun maintenance far too much to abuse their expensive weapons this way. Professional exhibition shooters in Wild West shows did develop fanning techniques, but these were entertainment demonstrations using specially modified guns with reinforced mechanisms, not practical combat techniques that anyone would use in a real gunfight. But that's nothing compared to our next Hollywood lie. This one involves the most famous weapon sound effect in Western movies, and the reality would make filming impossible. Number 2, gunshots were incredibly loud and echoed dramatically. Hollywood gunshots are thunderous, dramatic sounds that echo through canyons and can be heard for miles. Every shootout comes with booming sound effects that shake the theater and emphasize the deadly power of these legendary weapons. The gunshots in Western movies are clean, sharp sounds that ring out clearly above all other noise. While guns are indeed loud, the specific sounds Hollywood uses are completely unrealistic for the weapons of the Wild West era. Real black powder firearms produced sharp cracks, not the booming explosions heard in movies. The sound was more like a large firecracker than thunder, and it didn't carry as far as modern firearms. But here's what Hollywood never shows you. The real problem with gunfights wasn't the noise. It was the massive clouds of white smoke. Black powder firearms produced enormous amounts of thick, choking smoke with every shot. In a confined space like a saloon or during a multiple-shot gunfight, the smoke would quickly obscure vision completely and make accurate follow-up shots nearly impossible. This is why many real gunfights were decided by the first shots fired. Once the shooting started, the combatants were often firing blind through dense clouds of acrid smoke. The dramatic, clear-vision gunfights of Hollywood could never happen with black powder weapons because nobody could see their targets after the first few shots. Here's a fact that changes everything. The distinctive smell of gun smoke was nothing like modern firearms. Black powder smoke had a distinctive sulfur smell, like rotten eggs mixed with the acrid scent of burning charcoal and saltpeter. It wasn't the clean, sharp smell of modern gunpowder, but something much more unpleasant and choking that would make your eyes water. Real gunfighters often suffered from smoke inhalation during extended fights, and the thick smoke could trigger violent coughing fits that made accurate shooting impossible. Many accounts of real Wild West gunfights mention combatants stumbling around in smoke-filled rooms trying to find their opponents by sound rather than sight. But now we come to the biggest lie of all, something so fundamental to Hollywood Westerns that you've probably never questioned it. But it changes everything about how you understand the Wild West. Number 1, the Wild West was a lawless frontier where violence was constant. This is the big one, the foundational myth that underlies every Hollywood Western. The idea that the Wild West was a chaotic, lawless frontier where violence was an everyday occurrence. Survival depended on being quick with a gun, and justice came from the barrel of a revolver. It's the core assumption that makes every Western movie possible. The truth is exactly the opposite.
Most frontier towns were remarkably peaceful, with lower murder rates than many modern American cities. This might be the most shocking revelation of all.
Here's the mind-blowing reality. Famous cattle towns like Dodge City, Tombstone, and Deadwood typically recorded fewer than 5 murders per year, even during their wildest periods. Modern cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New Orleans have murder rates that would have made them seem like active war zones to Wild West residents. Most frontier towns had strict gun control laws that were far more restrictive than anything we see today. Many towns required visitors to surrender their firearms to the sheriff upon entering town limits. Carrying weapons within city limits was often illegal and strictly enforced by local law enforcement. Dodge City, supposedly one of the wildest towns, had signs posted at the city limits demanding that all visitors check their guns. The famous Boot Hill Cemetery in Dodge City, supposedly filled with gunfight victims, actually contains the graves of only 34 people over a 5-year period, and most of those died from disease, accidents, or natural causes, not gunfights. But here's what's really interesting. The Wild West had lower crime rates, partly because communities were small and everyone knew each other. Social pressure and community standards were often more effective than laws in maintaining order. Additionally, most frontier settlers were hardworking people trying to build new lives and businesses, not the rootless drifters and professional outlaws of Hollywood imagination. The legendary lawmen like Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Wild Bill Hickok were actually quite successful at maintaining peace in their jurisdictions. Their reputations for toughness often prevented trouble rather than creating it, and most of their work involved mundane law enforcement rather than dramatic shootouts. Real frontier justice was typically handled by established legal systems, not vigilante action. Most towns had elected sheriffs, appointed marshals, and regular court proceedings. The idea of taking the law into your own hands was generally frowned upon and could result in serious legal consequences. So, which of these revelations surprised you the most? Did any of these myth-busting facts completely change how you think about the Wild West? Was it the peaceful nature of most frontier towns, the rarity of the famous Colt 45, or maybe the truth about those non-existent quick-draw duels? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from fellow history enthusiasts who are passionate about separating fact from fiction. If you enjoyed this journey into the real Wild West and want to discover more hidden truths behind America's most legendary era, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.